The pistol clattered onto hardwood. Blue light strobed through the windows, and Viktor, covered in his sister's blood and his father's shame, stood perfectly still in the center of a house that had spent 10 years trying to bury him alive. 13 hours earlier, the rain had not yet stopped falling. Viktor's heavy leather boots stomped onto the wet porch. Moisture from the rain clung to his dark wool coat, beading along the fabric like tiny glass orbs. He reached for the brass door handle, his knuckles white from the cold. The metal was ice against his palm. He pushed. The door swung inward, revealing the hallway with its warm amber lamps and patterned carpet. A threshold between the gray dying light outside and the golden interior he had spent years avoiding. He stayed in the doorway, his silhouette casting a long, jagged shadow across the floor, a dark knife blade cutting through the expensive warmth of the home. Anna appeared at the end of the hall, red wine in one hand, silk cream blouse catching the light, perfectly styled blonde hair, sharp eyeliner that cut her face into geometric planes. She didn't move toward him. She only raised the glass, watching him over its rim as though he were a specimen under glass. "You're late, Viktor," she said, her voice smooth and sharp as a blade. Precision was never your strong suit. He shucked off his wet coat without responding, throwing it onto the mahogany bench instead of hanging it on the antique rack beside the door. Water droplets sprayed across the polished wood, dark stains blooming on the surface. The gesture was small, intentional, a minor violence against the order of the house. His father appeared from the dining room. Robert, adjusting his silver Rolex with fingers that showed the prominent blue veins of old age. He didn't look at Viktor's face, only at the wet coat on the bench. He sighed, a heavy, performative sound that contained the weight of years. "Hang it up, Viktor," Robert said, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. "We are not animals." Viktor ignored the command. He walked past his father, his shoulder intentionally brushing Robert's, forcing the older man to step back into the shadows. Then he stopped at the entrance to the dining room. He saw it, the portrait on the wall, a small, silver-framed photograph of his mother, smiling at something unseen. The frame was thick with dust. He reached out, his thumb moving across the metal frame, dry friction of skin on metal, clearing a small circle through the accumulated neglect. Inside the dining room, Anna was already seated, her knife cutting through a rare steak. The silver blade scraped against white porcelain. Red juice pooled around the meat in concentric circles. "Father was just saying," she began, her voice carrying that particular tone of mock concern that had infuriated Viktor for his entire adult life. "How the firm missed your particular energy this quarter." Viktor's hand tightened around his fork. The metal bent slightly between his fingers. He slammed it down on the table. The water in the crystal glasses rippled violently, concentric circles expanding outward. "I don't work for the firm anymore," Viktor said, his voice low and controlled. "I told you that 5 years ago." Robert leaned forward. His face was already reddening, the skin tightening across his cheekbones. He pointed a finger at Viktor. His hand shook with rage. Not the shaking of age, but the shaking of a man losing control. "You walked away from everything we built," Robert said, his voice climbing toward a shout. "You stayed in the dirt while Anna climbed, while she became something. Someone." The words hung in the air between them like a physical thing, a barrier that could not be crossed. Viktor stood so quickly, his chair toppled backward, clattering against the floor. He lunged across the table, grabbing Robert by the front of his starch-white shirt, his fists bunching the fabric. Silverware scattered, forks, knives, spoons clattering across the table, some falling to the carpet with soft thuds. Robert shoved him back. Viktor stumbled, his arm catching the edge of a heavy crystal decanter on the side table. The decanter tumbled. It shattered on the floor with a sound like screaming glass. Shards flew like diamonds scattered by a careless jeweler. Amber bourbon splashed across the carpet, soaking into the fibers. The smell of a whiskey suddenly thick in the air. Anna remained seated. Her hands stayed folded neatly on the table. She didn't flinch at the sound of breaking glass or the spreading stain. She watched the debris with a cold, detached expression. The expression of someone watching a scene in a play that she had already seen performed 1,000 times. "Clean it up, Viktor," she said, her voice monotone, deadly calm. "You always were the messy one." Late night found Viktor standing in the dark hallway, his eye just visible through a sliver of the doorway. The study, their mother's study, was lit by a single desk lamp. Shadows pooled in the corners of the room like spilled ink. Inside, Anna was hunched over the antique desk. She pulled a skeleton key from her pocket and inserted it into the small center drawer. The brass lock turned. The wood groaned as the drawer slid open. From her blouse, Anna withdrew a yellowed envelope. The paper was worn, fragile-looking, the wax seal cracked but still intact. She held it for a moment, staring at it as though the envelope itself might explode. Then she dropped it into the deep recess of the drawer and slammed it shut. The lock clicked. She leaned her forehead against the cool wood of the desk. Her fingers gripped the edge until her knuckles turned white. The skin stretched so tight, it looked almost translucent. "Stay buried," she whispered. The words were barely audible, a prayer to something dark that lived in the wood and shadows of the old house. Viktor pulled back into the darkness of the hallway. He became part of the shadows, indistinguishable from them, invisible. He waited until Anna's footsteps faded down the corridor, until he heard the door to her bedroom close with a soft click. Then he did not sleep. He sat in the darkness of his childhood bedroom, listening to the old house settle and creak around him, planning what he would need to do. At 2 a.m., Viktor used a heavy screwdriver to pry at the desk drawer. The wood splinters flew into the air, small honey-colored shards that caught the beam of his flashlight like fireflies. The old wood resisted, groaning in protest. But eventually the lock gave way. With a loud crack, the drawer popped open. Viktor's fingers scrambled through old receipts, through documents and photographs, until they hit the thick, textured paper of the hidden letter. His hand closed around it. He froze. A sound. Footsteps. Heavy boots thundering down the hallway. A flashlight beam cut through the darkness, pinning Viktor against the desk like an insect on a specimen board. Marcus, the security guard, charged through the door. His uniform was crisp. His face was set in the expression of a man trained to follow procedure without question. "Get away from the desk," Marcus shouted. "Now!" Viktor spun. He tucked the letter into his waistband. Panic flooded through him, white-hot and total. He threw a punch, his fist connecting with Marcus's jaw. The guard's head snapped back. Sweat and saliva sprayed from the impact, hitting the wall behind him. Marcus grunted, pain flashing across his face. But he was trained, experienced. He recovered quickly. Viktor didn't wait. He bolted for the window, diving through it as Marcus lunged forward. Glass shards from the broken decanter, now embedded in the carpet below, crunched under Viktor's shoes as he leaped. He hit the rainy grass outside with a heavy roll, the earth absorbing the impact. He lay there for a moment, gasping, feeling the mud soak through his shirt. Then he ran. The shed was small and rotting, barely standing. Viktor sat on the dirt floor, a single match providing the only light. Shadows danced across the wooden walls, strange, animated shadows that seemed to have their own life. He tore the wax seal off the envelope. The red wax crumbled like dried blood, like something alive that had lost all vital function. He unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was sharp and elegant, angular, precise. Anna's hand. The words were clear. Disciplinary scrub, Viktor's expulsion. The arrangement stands as agreed. His eyes moved down the page. At the bottom was a signed agreement between Anna and Robert, dated 10 years ago. His hands began to shake as he read the details. A financial transfer from the family trust to a school official. The amount was substantial. The signatures were unmistakable. They had paid for it. His expulsion, his banishment from school, from the family firm, from everything. They had paid for it and then spent a decade pretending it was his failure, his weakness, his choice. A branch snapped outside. Viktor's entire body went rigid. He heard movement, boots on wet earth. Search. They were searching for him. He blew out the match. The frame went pitch black. The darkness was absolute, consuming. He could only hear his own heartbeat, a sound so loud it seemed impossible that anyone within a mile wouldn't hear it. Early morning. The gray, cold light of dawn filtered through the windows. Viktor crept back into the house through the side door, the letter still tucked into his waistband. He moved like a ghost, his steps silent on the tile and hardwood. Anna was at the top of the stairs, her phone pressed to her ear. She was illuminated by the gray light, looking down at him as though she had been waiting for his return. "Yes, officer," she was saying into the phone, her voice pitched to carry perfect concern. "He's still in the house. He's dangerous and unstable." Viktor held up the yellowed envelope. He shook it at her. His hair was matted with rain, his face smeared with dirt. He looked like something caught in a trap, something wild and cornered, and beginning to understand the full extent of its predicament. "The golden girl's crown is slipping, Anna," he said. His voice was hoarse, cracked. "I read every word." Anna ended the call. She began to descend the stairs slowly, each click of her heels on the wood sounding like a gunshot. Her face was perfectly composed, but her eyes contained something new, a flicker of something that might have been fear. "Who will they believe?" she asked as she reached the bottom of the stairs. The successful daughter or the son with a history of violence? The son who broke into his father's house, who attacked the security guard. She stepped closer. Her voice was cold, logical, delivered with the precision of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome. "You have no evidence. Just your word against ours. And your word," she said, pausing to smile at him, "has never counted for much." In the kitchen, Anna lunged at Viktor as he tried to reach the back door. She grabbed his hair, pulling his head back with a jerk that sent white-hot pain down his spine. The letter flew from his hand, tumbling through the air like a bird shot from the sky. It landed on the kitchen island, and Anna immediately pivoted toward it. Viktor drove his elbow back, his strike connecting with her stomach. She doubled over, but her hand caught the edge of a heavy cast-iron pan on the stove. She swung it wildly, her body already moving on instinct, on the kind of rage that doesn't require thinking. The pan clipped Viktor's shoulder. He groaned, the pain immediate and bright. He stumbled into the kitchen table. It slid across the tiles with a deafening screech, a sound like metal on metal, like something dying. All the breakfast dishes crashed to the floor. Plates shattered. Glasses exploded. Coffee poured across the tiles in spreading brown stains. Anna pinned him against the counter. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes wild. She reached for a steak knife from the block on the counter, her fingers closing around the handle. Her eyes were filling with something that looked like absolute resolve. the look of someone who had moved beyond reason into a place where consequences no longer existed. Viktor grabbed her wrist just as the blade cleared the slot. They struggled, muscles straining, both of them breathing like animals. The kitchen was chaos. Broken dishes, spilled food, the smell of burnt coffee and sweat. Robert entered from the living room. In his hand was a large black pistol, a 9mm. His hand was steady in a way that suggested he had held a gun before, used a gun before. The power had shifted. The playing field had been fundamentally altered. He pointed the pistol at Viktor's chest. "Give it to her," Robert said. His voice was flat, final. "Give her the letter. Don't make me finish what the record started." Viktor's hands opened. The letter fell. Anna caught it and passed it to Robert. Robert didn't read it. He walked over to the fireplace where a small morning fire was crackling. The flames were bright, hungry, consuming anything fed into them. He dropped the letter into the fire. The edges curled instantly. Black spread across the paper like a stain. The handwriting, Anna's precise, elegant handwriting, turned to ash. The signatures of the pact that had destroyed Viktor's life disintegrated into nothing. The wax seal melted. The document became smoke. "There," Robert said, watching the letter burn. "It never existed. Just like your future." Viktor sank to his knees. He wasn't looking at his father or the burning letter. He was staring at nothing, at the space where proof had existed and now only existed as ash. Outside, the sound of sirens started in the distance. Small at first, then growing, getting closer, getting louder. The police that Anna had called were on their way. They would find him here, dirt-covered, blood-stained, with a history of violence and no evidence whatsoever. They would find his father with a gun and his sister with scratches on her arms from the kitchen struggle. And they would believe every word that came out of Anna's mouth because her voice carried the weight of a lifetime of being believed. The sirens grew louder. Viktor was on his knees on the carpet of his childhood home, and there was no way out. Then Viktor laughed. It was a low, guttural sound that didn't belong in the carefully curated perfection of the living room. A sound from somewhere deep inside him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He pressed a button. His own voice filled the room, his recorded voice, speaking to his father, speaking to his sister. The entire conversation, every word of confession, every incriminating statement, played back at them in perfect digital fidelity. "You think I'm as stupid as you needed me to be?" Viktor said, and his recorded voice echoed his words. "That was a photocopy, Father. The original is in my lawyer's safe." Anna's face drained of color. All the carefully constructed composure fell away. She looked at the fireplace. She looked back at Viktor. Her hands began to shake violently. The golden child facade, maintained for so long, so carefully, finally fractured like glass struck from the inside. Robert's hand tightened on the pistol. For a moment, a terrible, stretched moment. It seemed like he might pull the trigger. His eyes were wide. Panic and rage and something that might have been desperation flickered across his features. But the sirens were outside the door. Tires were screeching on the gravel. Police flashlights were cutting through the front windows, casting rhythmic shadows across the room. The sound of boots, multiple boots, running across the porch. "Police, open up!" The front door was being hammered on. The house was being invaded. The exterior world was forcing its way into the carefully maintained interior. The door burst open. 3 police officers flooded in, guns drawn and raised. They saw Robert with the pistol still in his hand, still pointed at Viktor. All their attention, all their tactical focus, converged on him. Light sources fixed on him, weapons aimed at him. "Drop the gun!" they shouted, their voices overlapping, creating a wall of authority. "Drop it now!" Robert's arm slowly lowered. The pistol, heavy in his grip, fell. It clattered onto the hardwood floor with a metallic thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. It was the sound of surrender. It was the sound of everything falling apart. Robert looked old. Suddenly, dramatically old. Shrunken. The weight that had held him upright for so long had simply been removed, and there was nothing underneath to support him. Anna collapsed into a chair. Her face was buried in her hands. Sobs racked her body, uncoordinated and ugly. The silk of her blouse was stained with her own tears and the mess from the kitchen struggle. She looked nothing like the Golden Girl. She looked like someone breaking apart at a cellular level. "I couldn't be the failure," she shrieked, her voice raw and desperate. "Not like him. I told Father it was the only way, to save the name, to save us. I told him we had to—" Her voice broke. She couldn't continue. The sobs consumed her, her entire frame shaking with them. Viktor stood over her. His shadow fell completely across her body. He didn't look angry anymore. He just looked profoundly tired. He held his phone out to the lead officer, the screen still glowing, still displaying the recording interface. "Everything is on there," Viktor said. His voice was flat, clinical. The blackmail, the bribery, the expulsion arrangement, the financial transfers, all of it. "The original documentation is in my lawyer's safe deposit box." The officer took the phone. His face was blank, trained to remain expressionless in moments like this. But his eyes registered the weight of what had just happened, the scale of the deception, the depth of the conspiracy. Robert was being guided toward the back of one police car. Anna was being led to another, her movements stiff and mechanical, as though she had forgotten how her own body worked. The blue light strobed across their faces as they passed through the windows of the vehicles. The wire mesh separated them from the outside world. They sat in the back seats, looking suddenly very small, very ordinary, very human. Viktor walked down the driveway. The rain had stopped. The sun was breaking through the clouds, hitting the wet pavement and making it glow like gold. Each step was deliberate, measured. His footsteps crunched on the gravel, steady, rhythmic, moving away. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't look at the police cars. He simply walked forward, into the brilliant morning light. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small photograph. It was crumpled, worn from being carried. The photo was of him and his mother. Him at 10 years old, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at something the camera couldn't capture. She was wearing a yellow dress. His hair was long and unkempt. They both looked happy. They both looked like they had no idea what was coming. He looked at the photo for a long moment. The morning sunlight caught it, illuminating the faces. Faces that had existed in a time before the betrayal, before the expulsion, before the carefully constructed narrative that had rewritten his story. Then he kept walking. The birds were beginning to sing. The sky was clearing. The weight that had sat on his shoulders for 10 years was not lighter. It was simply different now. Not a weight that was pressing him down. Just the weight of what remained, what endured, what couldn't be undone, even when all the carefully constructed lies had been burned to ash. His car was parked 3 blocks away. He would get in it. He would drive. He would not return to this house. He would not return to this town. There was nothing here that belonged to him anymore. There was no future here that required his presence. He walked into the morning light, and the house receded behind him, becoming smaller, less significant, just another structure among structures. The recording on his phone would be enough. His lawyer would use it. The truth, the particular, documented, undeniable truth, would unfold through the legal system, through the machinery of justice that moved slowly, but in this case, would move forward. Behind him, the police radio chatter continued. Behind him, his father and sister were being transported to separate locations for questioning. Behind him, the house stood empty and perfect in the morning light. Its carefully maintained facade now just a facade, stripped of the power it had once held. Viktor did not feel liberated. He did not feel renewed. He did not feel the kinds of things that people in stories are supposed to feel when they escape. He simply walked forward, one step after another, into the light, away from the shadows. The recording in his pocket was like a second heartbeat. Proof, documentation, the particular, irrefutable reality of what had been done to him. It was not forgiveness. It was not healing. It was simply the truth, preserved in digital format, waiting to be played back again and again until someone had to listen, until someone had to acknowledge what had been done. He kept walking,